Now to parenting today and how to help children with big feelings. Sadness, nerves, jealousy, anger and frustration, of course, just like adults. Children feel them too, but sometimes don't have the words or the skills to deal with them. Well, Jen Muir is a social worker, parent educator, author, founder of Connected Parenting and mum of 4 boys. Her latest book is called Little People, Big Feelings. And she says the job for parents of toddlers to teens and even into the 20s is to figure out what's going on behind the behaviour, to discover what's really going on.
When we're talking about big feelings in kids, it's really just having an understanding that for children to reach emotional maturity, they need to develop their prefrontal cortex. So it's the bit at the front of the brain, and that's not fully formed in kids until they're 25 to 28 years of age, which can really surprise a lot of parents. And it can be quite a relief because then we realise that all of the things we experience in babies, toddlers, preschoolers, tweens and even teens are so normal because that prefrontal cortex that makes kids reasonable, rational, conscientious, have them be able to focus on 2 things at once, and really reach that emotional maturity is still a work in progress for many, many years.
25 to 28 as being the age.
Yeah.
I thought it was 25. Are you
It's
telling me it's
25
another 3 years?
Depends if you've got a boy or a girl.
Both.
Yeah, so boys can be a little bit later. Boys' brains, see, here's what's so interesting about big feelings in little kids, and particularly the way it presents in little boys. So a lot of little boys can be, we can see behaviour that we really worry about. We're talking toddlers or preschoolers here. They might push, shove, hit, even kick and snatch. And parents, in the context of growing, kind, respectful men might look at that behaviour and be so worried. And here's what we know about what that behaviour really represents in little boys. So little boys are actually born more sensitive, and the layperson way to say it is bigger hearted than girls. When we look at their sensitivity to emotions in the early years, they're more sensitive, but their ability to communicate that verbally is minimum about 2 years behind girls. Their brains operate really differently, sort of front to back. And what that means is that emotions or big feelings come out as behaviour, comes out as pushing or hitting, because they just don't have the skills to translate that into a really pro-social way of communicating in those very early years. And if we just punish those big feelings, no hitting, without dealing with the underlying cause of that hitting, which is often an emotion. My brother knocked my Lego Duplo tower over and I'm really sad about it. We have to help kids with that underlying emotion if we want them to be able to learn to communicate that frustration in a pro-social way, which would be using their words.
Do we know why these big-hearted boys are often a couple of years later in being able to make sense of some of this?
It's brain development. They've got different skills. Their bodies are wired for movement and play. So their bodies sort of feel out the world through movement. I've got 4 boys. They range from 8 to 16. And I can tell you that for a long time, we could not have a family dinner without somebody falling off a chair. It's just this constant need to move, to express and to regulate. And the reason that boys are behind is just genetics. It's just sort of how they're wired. They have those spatial skills or those different ways of expressing. We find that by the time little boys and girls start kindergarten or the beginning of primary school, that girls are just so much more ready to learn, whereas little boys probably could benefit from an additional 2 years swinging from trees before we ask them to sit down.
And guess when children feel these big feelings, I guess that can be potentially quite a frightening thing when you first become aware that your body is able to send a signal that makes you feel a specific way. And it makes sense that they don't know what to do with that and they don't know how to make sense of that. I guess they don't have the words.
They don't. And it's frightening is a good way to put it, I think, for both the kids and the parents. I think that we need to look at these big feelings within the context of historically the way that all of us were raised. So for most of us when we were young, if we had a big feeling, if we had a big reaction because our mum said no to a biscuit, we probably would have been sent to our room, scolded, we might have been smacked, and really clearly we learned very, very young, hey, that expression, not okay in this relationship. And so we learned to tailor our expression of certain emotions. Now, millennial parents or modern parents are aware that those really more punitive practices around emotional expression, like smacking or sending kids to their room, we're like, oh, maybe, there's evidence saying that's not as great for kids long term. We're going to try and, yes, be firm and set boundaries, but try to do it in a way that feels kind or in collaboration with kids. So what we've now got is a generation of kids that are more comfortable. They feel safer to express their emotions, but actually a generation of adults who that was never done for them. So this is incredibly hard for the parents who are trying to sort of be the trailblazers and doing things a little bit differently in parenting without so much of what we call the stick. In terms of that old school discipline practice, what it means is we're trying to sit with our kids, not join them in that storm, but sit with them. And that can feel, I just want to acknowledge, it can feel so hard for the parent. And for the child, yeah, it feels really kind of scary when those emotions come out of your body. And the thing is with kids, emotions don't come out verbally. It takes a long time for us to express verbal, I feel this, I feel that. And in the meantime, it comes out either physically or through behavior. So what we always want to look at, a child that's, for example, refusing to put their shoes on and you've asked them 15 times and it's so frustrating as a parent, you're like, just put those shoes on. What we want to be asking some of the time is, this is a good kid. What's going on underneath this behavior? And often when we step back and reflect, what we can see is, it's Monday, it's sports day. I know that you get really worried about sports and I can see you having a hard time getting dressed today. How about I give you a hand with those shoes? And what we're doing in that moment is actually, we say we name it to tame it, but just by kind of helping our kids articulate how that behavior is expressing somewhere they're stuck, we bring light to it, we make them feel less alone, and often when kids feel seen and heard, they're more likely to, cooperate, for want of a better word.
Before we even talk about some of the strategies to use with children, what are some of the strategies that parents need to be tapping into? Because as you say, it's perhaps not the way that we were raised, but we need to make sure that in a situation that's beginning to blow up, that you're literally being the adult in the room, that you are not getting caught up in that kind of amygdala hijack of a confrontation or of a big feeling overspill.
Yeah, so the skill we're trying to build is not to not get affected by these emotions. It will feel for most parents as their toddlers break down because we cut their toast wrong or their teenager says, you're the worst parent ever. Sometimes the reaction in our bodies is the first sign. So our fists will clench, our breathing will shorten. We start to have thoughts like, if I don't teach my child, they will never. And that's about the point that we find our mother or our father suddenly just comes out of our mouth without our consent and we're in fight, flight or freeze. So if we can track back a little bit, if we can learn to start to spot those physical signs, I'm feeling really frustrated here. I'm feeling snappy. I can feel my fists clenching. I can feel that feeling in my stomach. If we can spot those early signs and almost give ourselves some kindness and compassion in the moment, this is really hard. This is that thing that I really struggle with, or this moment would be hard for any parent. I'm going to have a drink of water. I'm going to take a breath. This can be particularly useful in the midst of a big sibling conflict where we have this absolute sort of underlying urge to panic and think they're never going to get along. It's this absolute value that these kids get along, and yet you go to that fight, flight or freeze, you're going to punish the offender, make it all worse. If we can grab ourselves and go, okay, so this is really hard for me, then we're in a better position to help our kids. So a pause. The French actually have a term that they refer to all of their children, child raising, sort of from birth all the way up, and they call it la pause. And it literally means that baby cries. And, of course we're going to attend to the baby, but we just la pause and think, I've only just fed, so this might be about sleep. It gives you that opportunity to wonder what's underneath that expression of emotion and catch that urge to panic. And if we could implement a pause into, those sibling fights or those huge meltdowns, it gives us this opportunity where we have a choice. We can either go with that automatic programming and sort of get taken over by our subconscious brain that is just feeling this was not safe for me, therefore it's not safe. Or we can say, look, this is hard, but I'm going to meet my child's need in the moment. Incredibly, incredibly hard to do. So my second skill that I think has to tie in very much with this for parents who are doing this differently is self-kindness and self-compassion. And sometimes people roll their eyes when I say that. But as a mum of 4 who has struggled just as much as anyone with these skills, it was learning to be kind to myself on the couch at night after the day I had snapped or I had not been the parent I wanted to be in the moment that actually started to affect my parenting more than anything else. Because what we know is that if you sit on the couch and say, oh, I yelled at my kid, I sent them to their room, that's not the parent I want to be, I've probably ruined their attachment for life. That negative self-talk you do to yourself is actually as harmful as if a stranger walked into your living room and yelled at you about your parenting. It actually raises your cortisol. It makes you less likely to go better the next day. Whereas if we could treat ourselves the way we would treat a friend, oh, that wasn't my best moment, but hey, the goal is to try and get this stuff right some of the time, not perfectly. And I did say sorry, and that's really important. And I'm doing the best that I can. And it might be a sign I need more support or I need to take a break for me so I can keep showing up and doing this stuff. Then what happens is that really kind approach settles our amygdala. It tells us we're not needing to go into fight, flight, or freeze as often. And with that kind of gentle reflection and kindness, as well as working on catching the climb into dysregulation for ourselves, we can start to change the way we feel about feelings and therefore impact our kids in the next generation.
So important to remember the parents in this situation too. But you did talk about name it to tame it as one of the strategies, I guess, that parents can put into place. I remember this from certainly when my daughter was a toddler. She had very big feelings. And being given the advice of to be able to sit down with her and say, well, where are you feeling it? Like, whereabouts in your body are you feeling this feeling? And what does it feel like to you? Can you describe it to me? And I was actually really surprised at how that meant she was able to sort of unravel some of what was going on to her. Is that something that you would recommend parents do?
I would definitely recommend it. And it's so lovely to hear how effective that was for you. Where I wouldn't recommend it is in the absolute eye of the storm. A lot of advice on social media will tell parents, really clearly, and it's true, if we can name these emotions, we bring them to light, our kids feel seen and heard, and suddenly everything will be better. If we name an emotion with a really deep feeling kid when they are at a 10 out of 10 in intensity, it will likely make things worse because sometimes parents get caught in this idea that, I know, I'll name this emotion and this will stop it. And actually, our kids feel that fear in us and that resistance to the emotion as strongly as if we were saying, stop crying, because that's almost the intent we can get to in the peak of an emotion. Often we are not our best selves and our kids are definitely not their best selves. So if we could almost think of kids coming up a ladder in terms of intensity, from 1 to 5, whinging, whining, picking on siblings, being annoying, not listening, all of those lower level behaviours I like to think of, which are our little warning signs our kids are on a climb into dysregulation, they are our window of opportunity to name emotions. You put your arm around your kid who says, I hate this dinner. And you go, oh, something feels really different about this dinner. Where do you feel that in your body? And we might identify it's fear. There's peas in this. We talk about it. And suddenly our child feels more able to tackle the situation without losing it. And when we can do that really effectively, we can prevent that climb further into a full-blown, I call it DEFCON 4 level meltdown. But once our kids sort of cross that bridge and they are hitting or throwing things or screaming, raging on the floor, if we come in too quickly to name that emotion in that eye of the storm, it can often make things worse. And so what we're really trying to do when kids are in that eye of the storm is actually just calm ourselves. So the tips I give to parents, sometimes if possible, sit on the floor. That actually grounds your body and it makes you less likely to flip out. It kind of gets you calmer. I like to open my palms because our kids take in about 2 in 10 of our words when they're really dysregulated, but they take in all of our body language. If we can soften our face and just internally say something to ourselves like, this is a good kid having a hard time. My job is to accept the emotions and not all the behaviors. Like I don't let my child hit me, but I am going to say, yeah, this is hard. And sometimes we might say something as simple as, this is hard and I'm here. And then it's once our child comes back down off the other side of that peak that then we can say, whoa, you were so mad right then. Where did you feel that in your body? Does that make sense? That we definitely do it on the climb and we do it on the way back down, but we don't do it in the eye of the storm.
As children get older, I guess when you're getting into those teenage years and all the brain development and change that comes with that, I guess there might be situations that parents get into where it's not coming out as a straightforward thing. When they're little, it can be about my brother tipped over my Lego tower. But you often don't get the problem presented to you in a straightforward way as children are getting older. What are some of the ways that you can keep an eye out that I think maybe otherwise you might miss?
Yeah, teens. I've got a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old boy at the moment. And I often say to parents, my 16-year-old just got his learner's permit, so he's going to learn to drive. And I feel like I'm back in another stage of parenting where I've got my learner's permit as a mum, learning how to do this next stage in development. And what we know is that teenagers and older kids, their literal job is to start pulling away from us. So in the first, 12, even up to 14 years, our kids' safe base and the real thing that regulates them completely is us. It's coming in to have that co-regulation. We name their feelings, and we are that person that they can let it all out with. And it is really important developmentally that our teens start to push away and then they start to feel that their friends are that safe base, or that they can handle some of this stuff on their own. I think with teens, it's about really carefully looking for those moments or those windows where they open the door a little bit to us. And it can be side by side in the car, focusing on connection and really trying to join them in their world. We talk about special time with little kids, sitting and playing for 10 minutes and how powerful that can be. Recently I knocked on the door of my 14-year-old, and I asked if I could play his favourite video game with him. And the reason that I did this is that I had had a little whinge to my husband about, he's hit that stage of the grunting and the kind of, I don't know if he's okay. I don't know if this is just hormones or is he struggling in some way. And my husband, who jokes because I'm a parent educator, took quite a lot of joy in saying, well, he probably needs connection, which is what I do. And I thought, well, how do I connect with him now? His favourite thing is video gaming. But I sort of knocked on his door and I said, can I play? And his reaction was really surprising. He sort of looked at me with surprise and went, okay. And we played this video game for 10 minutes and he laughed at how terribly shocking I was at playing his favourite video game. And I didn't think much of it. It was a nice moment. But it was actually later that night where sort of 2 to 3 miracles, I believe, happened. But one, I was standing at the kitchen sink washing up and he appeared next to me, picked up a tea towel and started drying up without being asked, which, trust me, never happens. 2, he then turned to me and said, how was your day, Mum? Which I don't think in 16 years of parenting 4 boys I've been asked that question ever. And then we had this opening where he was having some struggles with maths. And I almost had a language to talk to him about the struggle he was having with maths that sort of just came up organically, because I could almost use some analogies from his favourite topic, that video game that brings him so much joy where he gets that mastery sort of feeling. So my biggest tips to parents really in that story is try to join them a little bit in their world. Sometimes with teens, so much of the communication is, did you pick up your towel, and have you done that thing? And if we can stop sometimes and really focus on connection, I think we do open the door for them to tell us a bit more about what's happening in their worlds.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about how hard we are sometimes on ourselves.
Yeah.
I guess, what would you say to parents who are perhaps feeling like they're in the trenches with this at the moment? What are some of the ways that you might talk to the parents and the children in situations like that?
The biggest thing I think modern parents need to know is that I don't think it's ever been as hard as it is right now to be a parent. And there are a number of reasons. And I think once we see some of these, we go, oh gosh, it makes sense why this is feeling really heavy, and it feels like I just can't do enough. So first of all, our village has changed. So the way we live and work and parent has changed. And there are good things about this. There are things that are less good, but it is different than the way that a lot of us were raised. The role of men and dads has changed significantly, and this is a great thing. But we're also often juggling work as well as child rearing. On top of this, we've got the information overload. So parents have never, ever had access to so much information about what kids need. And this is a really good thing. The problem is having so much awareness means we're so aware of what we're not doing, and we almost have this negativity bias. So we're sort of thinking, I didn't name that emotion today. I didn't get that right. And we sort of almost, parents with so much information can almost have this pressure around it where they feel with one wrong move, I might blow the whole thing up. Now, that's really stressful way to be sort of doing something like parenting, where it's riddled with mistakes. We're going to make mistakes constantly, and that's okay. It's kind of the showing up and trying and being reflective that really matters. So I think those two things particularly are playing a really big role on modern parenting, as well as a 24/7 news cycle, social media on tap, where kind of our attention's being divided and being asked to almost work like we don't have kids and have kids like we don't work. On top of all of those factors, parents are parenting in a way with this emotional stuff we've just talked about that is different to the way that they were raised. So admirable, so good for the next generation, but so hard to do in the moment. And so I think once parents realize, oh, it's not that I'm failing and getting this wrong, this is genuinely a more intensive sport than it used to be, parenting. We're doing more of it, we're busier than ever, and we're trying to be more. I saw a recent stat for parents of young kids that they're actually playing with their kids as a working parent in 2025 more than a stay-at-home parent played with children in 1975. So it is kind of an intensive thing that they're doing, and they're doing a really beautiful job. So that is what I would say firstly to parents that are feeling they're struggling right now. Hey, that makes so much sense because it's a huge ask. And then I would say that, yes, the tips and the tricks that we've talked about today are good. But before we can almost do that, we need to sort of check on you. What have you done recently for yourself that is fun? Even just a 10-minute walk for you once a week is better than nothing. How can we start to look after that parent? Because we simply can't be what our kids need with the context of what I've just described without looking after parents. And sometimes that's a meaningful conversation with your partner, if you have one, about how can we divide the workload? What are we finding just isn't working in this family? What can we ditch? How can we lighten this? How can we tap each other out so that we both get little breathers to do things that fill our own cups? And then it's about applying the information that we have access to these days, but remembering that our goal is to be good enough, not perfect. And of all the tips that I've talked about today, or the tips that I share with parents through my work, I apply these tips in my personal parenting of my 4 boys around 30% of the time. Around 30% of the time, I'm trying to set a boundary in 4 steps that's kind and compassionate and name emotions that are happening for my child. But in the reality of raising 4 boys and running a business, there's no way we can stop and name every emotion our child ever has. And that's totally okay. And in fact, what the evidence shows is that's about the right amount for our children and for us in terms of sustainability. So just those 3 things, remembering it's okay to be good enough.
Remembering it's okay to be good enough. There you go. There's the lesson for the day. Jen Muir, social worker, parent educator, author, founder of Connected Parenting and mum of 4 boys there, talking about helping children with big feelings.